morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very exciting day today, the 26th day of July 2023. And it's a beautiful day out there, 16 degrees and mostly sunny. And the weather's looking just fabulous out the window. It's a beautiful day right here in Brisbane. Well, let's get on with the news. First of all, let's take a look at the news in brief at the courtesy of ABC before we go into the rest of the news.
Governments across the country have been slammed over their failure to make progress on closing the gap targets, with the Productivity Commission accusing them of taking a business-as-usual approach. The Commission has released a draft of its first overarching review of the agreement, which was signed by all Australian governments in 2020. It says Australian governments have failed to grasp what's required to achieve the targets under the national agreement. A major rescue is underway in Western Australia after a large pod of whales beached themselves on the state's south coast. The pod of more than 80 long fin pilot whales became stranded at Chains Beach, about 60 kilometres east of Albany, late yesterday. The mammals were first spotted late on Monday, behaving unusually about 150 metres offshore. A firefighting plane in Greece has crashed off the island of Evia, killing 2 people as authorities continue to battle against fires across the country. Evacuation orders are in place on Evia and Corfu, while a blaze on the island of Rhodes continues to move inland, burning in mountainous forest areas. A third successive heat wave in Greece has pushed temperatures back above 40 degrees Celsius across parts of the country. And this year's Miles Franklin Literary Award has been won by Shankari Chandran with her third book, Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens. Chandran's novel explores race and racial identity in both Sri Lanka and Australia. The 48-year-old Sydney-sider is the 19th woman to win the $60,000 award.
Congratulations on winning that award. That is quite an achievement. It's just wonderful to see. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to the finance.
On to finance now. Here's Alan Kohler.
The Aussie dollar snuck a few points higher and the share market went up 0.5% thanks to some very big gains by mining companies, especially the iron ore miners, while banks went down a bit. And shares in Hong Kong and Shanghai also went up. And it was all because China's Politburo had a meeting yesterday, and last night they acknowledged that economic progress was tortuous, as they put it, and promised to tackle unemployment and to boost consumption of cars, electronic products and furniture. But they don't seem to have mentioned the property market, which is China's biggest problem. House prices are falling and real estate sales are having the biggest, most prolonged downturn in decades. But the Politburo pronouncement was welcomed by markets anxious about tomorrow's inflation data, which will determine whether we get another rate hike or not. Now, the odds of a rate hike in August are put at 80%. And if not then, 100% in September. But it all depends on tomorrow's CPI. Oil jumped 2.5% last night, but iron ore and gold were flat. And the global wheat price surged 6%. Finally, a chart of the biggest US opening weekend movie box office hauls. Barbie and Oppenheimer together, or Barbenheimer if you will, grossed $244 million, or $162 million for Barbie and $82 million for Oppenheimer, but both were well beaten by 2 Avengers and a Star Wars. And that's finance.
And that is finance on this Wednesday, the 26th of July. So, ladies and gentlemen, right on, moving on. Alzheimer's, which is causing a bit of a problem. What drugs are there? Are we at a turning point? Let's find out from this news.
An international study has given new hope of an effective drug to treat Alzheimer's disease.
This new drug that's being hailed as a turning point in the fight against Alzheimer's. The drug can slow down cognitive decline by up to 35%.
We're seeing the cumulative benefits of years of work coming to fruition.
Even though it would seem a progress that was made, it is the illusion of progress, unfortunately.
About 400,000 Australians are living with dementia, and most of them have Alzheimer's disease. No one knows the cause, but when you look at the brain of someone with Alzheimer's, it's filled with a substance called beta amyloid. So much so that researchers around the world have focused on finding ways of removing amyloid in the hope of relieving the symptoms of Alzheimer's. Early trials showed that removing amyloid didn't work when people had significant dementia. So in recent years, the treatment trials have moved earlier and earlier in the Alzheimer's process before too much brain damage has occurred.
I've got a level of amyloid that's just a little bit higher than average for my age, as I understand it.
Recently retired, Colin Gare doesn't just fill his days playing guitar. Although the amyloid hasn't affected his thinking and memory, Colin is in a separate clinical trial to remove it in the hope it'll make a difference to him in the long term.
And I suppose Alzheimer's scares all of us. It's not a very nice prognosis. I feel quite privileged that I'm involved in a drug trial that may help us better understand the connection between amyloid and Alzheimer's.
Associate Professor Paul Yates is a geriatrician who conducts clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease, including the trial that Colin is on.
The drugs that we're seeing positive results for are what's called monoclonal antibodies. They're targeted against the abnormal proteins that we see in the brain in Alzheimer's disease, particularly one called beta amyloid. So the current trial that's been of most interest is this trial called Trailblazer, and it's been of a medication called donanemab.
The donanemab trial that made global headlines tested the drug on people with amyloid in their brains and early stages of cognitive decline.
First, they confirmed that this medication lowered amyloid very powerfully. So 70% to 80% of people in the study had completely cleared their brains of amyloid. They also showed that with lowering of amyloid, people showed a reduction in rate of cognitive decline in the order of about 30-35%.
Not everyone is convinced. An international group of specialists and researchers are concerned that the benefits of these drugs don't necessarily merit the risks or the price tag. One of this group is Professor Alberto Espe, who researches degenerative diseases of the brain. Professor Espe, what do you make of this 35% difference in progression of disease?
The percentages of relative change, they sound amazing, if only that was true, because when we hear 25% or 30%, even 20% improvement in a disease of any kind, you think that's very large. But what's actually much more important is actually knowing where people were at the beginning of the trial and where they end. That's actually more meaningful.
These statistics can do your head in, so let me explain. It's about expressing the statistics in terms of you and me as individuals and what changes we could expect if we were to take the drug ourselves. Imagine that Emily and I are walking towards Alzheimer's disease. Emily's on the drug, I'm not. So I'm walking 35% faster towards Alzheimer's disease than Emily. But because we're walking slowly, when we get to the finish line, the gap between us isn't large. And that's what happened in the donanemab trial. The 35% slowing in cognitive decline actually translated to quite small differences for individuals taking the active drug. In fact, it was between 4 and 7 months slowing of progression. And some...
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, and I think that's a good progress that's being made into that amyloid that's in the brain. And with the research, if they are able to control that, any breakthrough in that field, in that area, would be very good, because this is something terrible that happens to people, especially when they age. Well, right now, Labor wants to deliver, or Labor will not deliver, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan on time.
Deliberate sabotage of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan by the previous government would make it difficult to meet the deadlines, and I've been frank about that. I said from the very beginning that the deadlines would be difficult to meet. Of course, I hoped that coming into government, we would be able to pick up the ball that the previous government had dropped and get on with delivering the plan. But the advice that's been made public today by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority confirms my worst fears. It is impossible, in their view, to meet the the full water recovery targets under the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in the time allocated under the plan. So by the middle of next year, we should be about 750 gigalitres further ahead than we're currently scheduled to be. So to give you an idea of the shortfall we're talking about, 750 gigalitres is about 300,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools short of the water recovery targets that we've set.
The competing demands here are immense, inestimable in many ways, particularly between the states. But you remain committed. You're going to have to negotiate with them. Remain committed to the 450 gigalitres. You must have in mind some ballpark expectation of a date by which you could make good on that commitment. What is it?
Well, I'm currently talking with the basin states and territory about how we fully deliver the plan. They all committed to full delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. That includes the 450 gigalitres of additional environmental water. Just to, again, give you an idea of the scale of this, when we came into government, 2 gigalitres out of that 450 gigalitres had been delivered by the previous government. We're now at 26 gigalitres, either delivered or contracted, towards that 450 gigalitre target. I think the other thing that shows you just what a go slow we've been on in recent years from the Liberals and Nationals is the fact that 84% of all of the water that has been recovered towards the plan has been recovered under Labor governments. So just 16% over the last 9 years. So the bulk of the time that the plan's been operational, the previous government was actively sabotaging it by changing program parameters, by cancelling projects, by really showing in all of their actions that they weren't committed to delivery. And that's a disaster. We're going into another hot, dry period. We should be better prepared for that, and we would be better prepared for that if the previous government had done their job.
All right, but of the four...
So there you guys always say the blame on the previous government. And I think that question was quite nicely put forward there by the journalist. It's quite tactful in the manner that he put that across. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now let's move on and look at the support services for people coming out of jail or out of prison. And is there enough support for them to keep them out of there? We have seen repeat offenders.
I guess the main thing that people suffer from when they get released is a misunderstanding of the conditions that they've come from. It's like living in your bathroom for 5 years with someone else and then having access to your backyard and then getting released back into the community with the expectation that you're going to cope. So I think the services that exist are great for people who probably don't have issues like the health service, the medical service and things like that. But for people coming from that environment, I think they really struggle because there's a really deep misunderstanding of the issues that people are actually facing and what happens in the transition period. And you mentioned that first day or two, that can be like unbelievably overwhelming for someone who has been in those conditions for years at a time. So to come out and then have this expectation you're just going to adapt straight away it's really quite overwhelming for people, and they don't cope at all very well.
Yeah, I think, when I read that the first day or two, that was really striking to me. It's something I hadn't thought about. And also, when ex-prisoners described just the sheer exhaustion of re-entering the real world, was that your experience as well?
Yeah, it's really hard work. Like, I was released from prison on a Wednesday and I ended up back in court on the Friday because what I knew to do was to go and then continue to medicate the pain that I was in. I come from a very traumatic background. I had a very self-destructive drug addiction. I had a lot of self-hatred. And a lot of those things, they weren't addressed in custody. And I guess they are today to a certain extent. But I think there's still a deep misunderstanding of what people do go through. And also, too, the jail actually sets up a bit of a false self-esteem for people because all the conditions are created externally. So, the structure, the discipline, the routine, but the inner world of that person actually, doesn't really get addressed that much. So, that you can become good prisoners, but our job really is corrections job really should be to create good neighbours, and doing that in those environments. When you look at the pictures on the screen now, it's like, how do you support someone or prepare someone to come back into the community when you look at those conditions?
Yeah. And Andrew...
So there you are. That's a big question as well. People, living in those conditions and then released out into the community. Should there be a transition period? Should they be slowly released through soft release rather than just say, yeah, okay, here, mate, you are out, and then go and face the world? What has gone through their minds while they were in, and the condition that they are in? And is there any support for them when they do go out? So that's a big question out there as well. Right now, we're looking at Tamworth, where a reading experiment and the results are looking good.
Leon, Kinnan, we got a delivery. Our books are here. Ready? You ready? Hold your book, Kinnan. We're going to take it in and go read them. Hold yours. Ready? Let's go read them. We have to read it. Which one did you get, Kinnan?
Every month, 4-year-old Kinnan and his 2-year-old brother Leon receive a free book in the mail.
T-Rex is very clever. We have ones like that are very funny, a bit gross, as little boys are, that are read a lot. So she can borrow all the books.
These kids have been part of an experiment since they were born.
There's no stopping them. So we hadn't even been discharged from hospital. He had his newborn hearing screening and they said, do you want to be on the program? And you just tick a box. We received our book on the spot, and from then on it just comes to you in the mail.
Since 2019, nearly every child born in Tamworth has been signed up to the program and will keep receiving a free book every month until they turn 5. The country music capital is the only city in Australia that's offered the program to all children. And it started with one of the world's biggest country stars.
I just always thought there was magic in books because it takes you to other places, anywhere you want to go.
Dolly Parton grew up in rural Tennessee with an illiterate father.
Daddy never had a chance to go to school, and Daddy couldn't read nor write. But he was really a smart person, and I often wondered what all he might have done had he had an education.
In 1995, she started the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, sending free books to disadvantaged children in her home state. Her charity has now become a model that's been exported to other countries.
Isn't that wonderful? What a way to remember Dolly Parton. A great initiative out there. Books, and in today's digital age of everything and virtual reality, the AI, books still remain relevant. That's wonderful to see. Good on you, Dolly Parton, for starting that charity. All right, now, when is yes a yes or maybe a no?
You were speaking with senators today while they were examining the harmonisation of consent laws. When we talk about that, who's leading the way here? Which states and territories are the gold standard?
There are a number of states that have moved towards the gold standard as we know it. And when I say gold standard, I mean moving towards affirmative consent or having adopted affirmative consent. And I mean, the ones that come to mind as most recently having been adopting it is New South Wales and Victoria. But there are still a number of states who have not moved towards this gold standard.
Mm-hmm. And you work with school kids through your work at Consent Labs. What have you noticed in terms of the gaps in what kids are learning about consent? Where are the biggest kind of, holes in that system?
I mean, currently consent education is not applied consistently when we look at a national framework. There is no current framework or standard outside of the curriculum as to how consent education should be delivered. It's very patchwork if we look at it from a national perspective. We have had a lot of discussions within the past year at a federal level about mandating a foundation to year 10 mandatory consent curriculum, but that again will be implemented on a state and territory basis. So what that actually looks like for students across Australia could look really different. And I think the conversations that we're having today is how do we look at this from a national perspective?
And in terms of the reception to that call for a foundation, a compulsory foundation of consent learning in those year levels, what's the response been like?
I mean, it's positive. I think it's absolutely a step in the right direction. But for us as education providers, the question is really around implementation. How do you do this well, and how do you do this consistently and comprehensively and in a way that is aligned to best practice?
And you've mentioned...
So that's a big challenge, and of course it is another big question out there in the community. But this education needs to be given out to the children, and how does it flow on in a consistent manner when there are different states adopting different methods and different rules? So I think work's been done in that area as well, and it will be the implementation as a challenge that was mentioned. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to look at some of the functions and events. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you in this segment today. And it's been wonderful having your company today on this 26th day of July 2023. Well, moving on, we will be having a very special segment today at 4 p.m. We will introducing the afternoon segment with some of the very special interviews that we have coming up. So, ladies and gentlemen, until then, it's goodbye from us. Bye.